The Prime Directive is often cited as the main guiding principle of the Federation and Starfleet at large, but it was not always the way. When humanity began its explorations into the stars, they did so without many of the rules that they would later come to establish, and much of the weight fell onto the shoulders of Captain Archer, and the fresh Admiralty back at Starfleet headquarters. Hi all, Rick here, looking into the origin behind one of the Federation's strictest mandates. The Vulcans that made first contact with Earth only did so based on their own experiences. The Vulcan first contact is attributed to the Etosha in Apocrypha, who attempted to raid early Vulcan in pre-Serac times. That did not go well for them. However, it did teach the Vulcans a lesson. As they embraced logic, the Vulcans discerned that they should not follow the Etosha's playbook of trying to exploit a more primitive species, seeing how badly it went for them. Plus, the more peaceful tendencies spreading across Vulcan in its time of awakening. As they branched out, they made the declaration to observe other species in secret, especially their spacefaring endeavours to gauge when it was likely that a pre-warp society would start encountering other species. It was not necessarily the detection of warp drive that was considered this factor, but that is a good proxy to go by. The Vulcans made contact with the Klingon Empire, and after numerous failed attempts at showing hospitality, something the Klingons perceived as falsehoods and weakness, it had become standard procedure to adopt an aggressive and confrontational display of force when encountering a Klingon ship. This was still not ideal, but it did result in less confrontation, when the Klingons would realise that they could not bully the Vulcans. After all, the early Klingon Empire consisted of a lot more ununified raiders. This will be important later. During the 22nd century, the Vulcans' own code of first contact was used as the basis for Starfleet's own doctrine, but it did not come into play until the formation of the United Federation of Planets in 2161. This means that from the earliest interstellar expeditions, mostly trade-oriented to colony efforts, there were no exact governing laws regarding dealings with other powers or people. Now, this did not exactly matter for a time, as interstellar cargo haulers were only looking to trade with others who had resources they could use, and colonists were likely to avoid already inhabited planets simply because they didn't want the competition. Additionally, humans were still considered the newbies to the scene, and as such our technology and reach was limited anyway. The first contact between Klingons and humans was a turbulent one, and in hindsight considered disastrous. After the Broken Bow incident, a human farmer shot a Klingon, which was not a good impression, but following on from that, Starfleet returned the Klingon to Kronos after rescuing him and couriering him home. This was seen as dishonouring the individual in question, despite the completion of his mission, and the only thanks Starfleet got was being permitted to leave Kronos unmolested. This marks the long and turbulent juggling act of balancing what humans consider moral and honourable with the Klingon philosophies, and is often cited within UFP history as the instigating factor in creating first contact protocols. When the Enterprise NX-01 spearheaded exploratory ventures, Archer was generally left to exercise his own judgment in how to approach first contact with others. Many that he had encountered were already spacefaring, and almost anything was on the table to be shared, like the Axanar or Zerillians. Experiences, resources, unclassified technology, anything that could help humanity grow, and this exchange was often reciprocated, humans often eager to share their culture with others too. Things became a little more clouded when there was a clear technological divide. Pre-warp civilizations could be severely contaminated by concepts they did not understand, something the Enterprise learned in 2151 when they encountered the Akali. Against advice from the Vulcan liaison on the ship, Subcommander T'Pol, an away team beamed down in disguise to observe firsthand the species. In this instance, it's just as well they did, as they encountered an outside influence within the Akali culture and removed it. However, it is a messy affair that results in the reveal of alien life to some Akali, and witnessing the intervention of another species and the dangers it can bring to an ill-prepared society, well, Archer notes the need for an official guideline. Later that year, The medical know-how of the Enterprise led Archer to continuing to think on the notion of official doctrine when it came to interfering in the evolution of another species. Events like this are compounded by further issues in 2152 when a Starfleet communicator is lost among a pre-warp society. This leads to contamination when the species begin to believe that their political rivals had access to advanced technology, altering how they would approach a conflict on a global scale. While this was an accident, it again highlights the need for more strict guidelines. With the formation of the Federation after the Romulan War, Vulcan brought much to the table, but among their flashier Warp 7 engines and scientific development was the direct adaptation of their own First Contact guidelines. This was ratified into General Order 1, advised by all of these prior incidents, and it marks the first Starfleet time it was put into writing. The first line captures the overall mandate that no starship may interfere with the normal development of any alien life or society, and further sections clarify this broader statement into actionable rules. However, enforcement of this general order was inconsistent and widely applied on a case-by-case basis. The directive is most often associated with protecting societies on a more primitive level of technology, but in actuality it applies to every world or peoples they meet. While violating General Order 1 was met with punishments, often a case could be made to excuse such repercussions. One such permitted intervention was the removal of outside influences, and it marks Starfleet as one of the first organisations to go out of its way to protect another planet's self-determination, even if they were not a Federation world. Once more, warp drive was used as a determining factor when making first contact, as by achieving faster than light travel, it was inevitable that a species would start encountering other alien life. The Federation, based on the peaceable first contact from the Vulcans, decided that they should do their utmost to ease any such transition wherever they encountered it. 2168 sees a violation of this, however, when the USS Horizon visits and completely contaminates the culture of Sigma Iota 2. With 1920s Chicago styles, after the Society found a simple book left by the Horizon crew. This is cited as a pre-Prime Directive event, however, and technically is correct as it was not known as the Prime Directive in this time. This begins a long period where Starfleet tries to follow this as a guideline, but it's frequently bent. In 2246, Captain Robert April warned the pre-warp Pericans of an incoming meteor shower, which allowed them to prepare and survive the Armageddon, something that technically was in violation of General Order 1, but hand-waved away because it saved an entire society. In 2248, he also used Starfleet technology to fix a drought on Narelle, and revealed the presence of the Enterprise to the Ohawk civilization on Manus II. In 2258, the planet Neurol saw the primitive inhabitants made aware of Starfleet even though they were protected by the Prime Directive. In this case, a judgment call was made by then Lieutenant Kirk to reveal his nature as an off-worlder to the native inhabitants, but they understood and maintained the secret. In 2259, however, the appropriately named USS Archer, under the command of Commander Gin Riley, made the erroneous first contact mission with the inhabitants of Kylie 279, who had reverse-engineered warp tech that they had observed from nearby Federation Klingon skirmishes. The follow-up mission of the Enterprise NCC 1701 resulted in the complete reveal and disregard for General Order 1 from Captain Pike, who did so to avert the oncoming global war that the Kylie were approaching. Captain Pike himself escaped many of the repercussions of this event, as he argued that the accidental contamination had already steered Kylie 279 down a radically different path than it would have gone, had they not been able to observe the UFP Klingon War from afar. This leads Starfleet to re-evaluate General Order 1 and rename it the Prime Directive, reinforcing its importance. Breaking it, both going forwards and in hindsight, was now considered even more of an issue. This did rub many the wrong way, as it now led to less room to exercise a more moral judgment. In 2268, A Federation observer and historian John Gill was assigned to covertly watch the pre-warp society of Ecos. However, he cast aside the Prime Directive and began to influence the planet into replicating Earth's Nazi Germany, believing he could provide structure without all the, let's say, bad stuff. He was compromised and failed, and the pre-warp planet went to war with its interstellar neighbour, Xeon. To date, this is pretty much the worst violation of the Prime Directive. By the 24th century, the Prime Directive was more heavily spelled out, with multiple sub-clauses and sections describing different scenarios, leading to stringent enforcement. Covert observation and the removal of all traces of Starfleet's presence were paramount when it came to pre-warp cultures such as the Mintakans, and even the saucer section of the Enterprise D needed to be recovered entirely from the uninhabited Viridian 3, considering its neighbouring planet did have intelligent life, and might one day get there. In addition to the mitigating factor of contaminating another culture, the Prime Directive also serves as a security measure, giving a strict policy of holding back all advanced tech from rivals of the Federation. Not its primary focus, but a welcome result. Protocol also now dictated that Federation first contact be made when a culture was at the cusp of encountering other interstellar life, and still, warp drive was the cited marker of inevitability. Thanks to all the history with the directive, standard operation was now to observe a culture for a time in secret and use that time to acquaint the Watcher with the ways and knowledge of the culture they are observing. During these operations, the directive was pretty much as written in its inception, with some additional paragraphs later on, but it was taken far more seriously. It had always protected other cultures, even those of comparable technology, but Starfleet really had its hands bound when it came to intervening. Even if asked to do so, even with permission from another power, the request had to be weighed, and sometimes the result was withholding UFP help. Starfleet, however, would always endeavour to assist within its guidelines, but generally those rules included things like ensuring no Starfleet tech was studied in detail, and we are left with the impression that it became a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare. This was on both sides of the scale too. Starfleet prioritises the rules of other cultures within their own territory in order to facilitate hospitality and respect. This too leads to diplomatic incidents when some of those laws are deemed immoral. Basically, with the increasing scale of the Federation, the complexity of managing the Prime Directive grew too. Things did seem to begin to ease off in the later 2370s onwards, however, with Starfleet being witnessed giving even more aid and even some admirals throwing out the directives to do their own thing. This is possibly in hindsight of the Dominion War, and Starfleet effectively trying to foster and continue the unity that emerged from that conflict, as well as to entice allies to aid the Federation rebuild. By 2380, things were still stricter than the 23rd century, but the red tape was being cut back a little. I intend to do a video covering the worst breaks in the Prime Directive, but felt that this was a necessary primer on the topic before going into detail on the actual incidents to give some context. Essentially, the history of the Prime Directive can be broken down into eras. The first era is the pre-Federation, 2100s to 2161, where there was no definite description, just a captain's judgment. Then the early Federation General Order 1 from 2161 to 2259, which saw it interpreted more as a guideline, even by many within Starfleet's own Admiralty at times. From 2259, over the next century or so, it was taken far more seriously, and many of the operational standards were honed thanks to this. By the mid-24th century, it was almost dogma in its application, leaving almost no room for arguing against it. Where it goes remains to be seen, but whatever state it was in, the Prime Directive remains a topic of occasional controversy and worthy of discussion within the Federation. Thanks for watching this breakdown on the history of the Prime Directive. I've been Rick, and I'll see you next time for another video. hopefully revisiting this topic with a look into some of the worst or most warranted times it was broken. Thanks again, and until then, goodbye.